Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. In case you've forgotten, my name is Nick Beres. I've been off for a while. The last 2 or 3 weeks, as you know, I've injured my back and I've been out with, a pinched nerve in my back. My father passed away last week, and I was in Boise, Idaho. Sad, not tragic. He was 91 years old, and I was there with him, and so that's why I was gone last week. I'm back now, and it is good to be back. And on this Monday, we're going to talk about something we've been planning on with my guest for a while. A sea change potentially coming to the real estate business, all right? Now, we've all bought and sold homes or maybe have property that we've invested in, things like this, okay? There's been a major lawsuit, a major settlement, and a major change maybe in the way buyers and sellers deal with properties moving forward. It's significant, okay? That's going to affect us all one way or the other. The number is 737-7587, but I recommend you sit back and listen, try to get a handle on this, because frankly, I'm still a little bit concerned about how this is going to work, even after reading this, concerned and confused. And with us to help clear up the morass is someone who probably understands this in one way is going to say it's going to work for us all. It'll work for him because he's just a very successful real estate agent, and that's Bernie Gallerani. Good morning.
Well, welcome back. I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better to at least show up to work with us.
I know, right?
So we could do the show.
Let me just say, he's missed me. I know he's missed me. He checked in on me, and that was very nice of you. Yeah. He's a friend, and I thank you for that. But this is something, that you talked about a few weeks ago or a couple months ago when you were coming on. We said we'd hit it on. We're finally getting to it. All right, so the bottom line is there's a groundbreaking $418 million settlement announced. Okay, this was back in March, all right, when this happened. And it has to do with how homes are bought and sold. And just real quick, the way I kind of understand it when I'm reading from this, and then I want you to kind of clarify. Home listing brokers, okay, would provide an offer of compensation to the buyers, agent up front. You may know, when you buy a home or whatever, okay, you end up paying or selling a home 6%, and the 6% is split between the seller's broker and the buyer's agent. 6%. That's coming from out of the sale of the home, and they split it. That's how they make money. So how is this changing things? And before you offer your opinion, and I know you have one on how it'll play out, talk about how this changes things for people selling and buying homes moving forward.
And we're opening Pandora's box in this conversation regarding what happens in the real estate business moving forward. So the settlement that happened last year, NAR settlement, the lawsuit that was judged upon and found guilty on last year in Missouri was a massive lawsuit. And NAR, National Association of Realtors, has settled out in that lawsuit and has made some changes regarding what the lawsuit was about. So it's going to give up almost $500 million or 400 and some change million.
Who's going to get that money, by the way, besides the lawyers?
This is the fun part, right? Because lawyers always win.
They get the biggest chunk.
Plaintiff, they get the biggest chunk.
Were the plaintiffs sellers, buyers?
They were sellers.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they're going to end up with a couple $1,000s.
The lawyers are millionaires.
In the hundreds of millions is what the lawyers will walk away with. If it all works out as it's maybe in black and white, I'm not sure. I'll let them figure their stuff out. But so what's going to happen from what we know today? When you signed a listing contract previous to today,
let's talk about when I bought my first.
So this really we have to focus on today. A seller and what their responsibility is going to be moving forward, and what a buyer's responsibility is going to be. So when you listed a home previously...
Let's do this. And let's lay this out for people who maybe haven't bought homes. Previously, when you went to list a home, what did you do, and how did it work out with how the monies were split?
Well, this is where it's going to get a little foggy, okay?
Right.
When you listed your home with an agent like myself, and you paid a 6% commission, as you said, you really paid the agent, the listing agent, 6%, and then the listing agent determined at that point what they were going to give a buyer's representation. So a buyer is buyer's agent bringing the buyer to the home. So this listing agent, let's just in this case say it was me, said I'm now listing the property, and I'm going to take care of all the selling costs in regards to the commissions, and I'm going to pay the buyer's agent 3% of that 6% to bring me the buyer. And that was how it worked. So I would offer you 3%, and I would continue to keep 3%, the other 3% for myself.
Okay.
Okay, so that was the total of 6%. All right.
Okay, but it seems to me there in that arrangement, you did most of the heavy lifting. As the seller.
Well,
the buyer just sees the listing and brings someone to you.
Well, I don't want to discount anything that the buyer's agent does. I think that obviously we all need to be compensated in
sure. I'm not saying
this.
they shouldn't be compensated, I guess, but you know.
Well, I think so. I think what the biggest kind of conversations that I've had outside of this or within this judgment is that the seller is no longer responsible for paying the fee to the buyer's agent. So I want to make sure that everyone understands this clearly. The seller was never responsible for paying any commissions to the buyer's agent. That was never a law or a rule. And this is where the media, and you watch it on TV, and you say, well, this is no longer the law. That was never the law. That was never the law. The seller paid the commission to the listing agent, and the listing agent determined how much money they were willing to pay the buyer's agent.
Did NAR set that as being 6%, which was standard for the industry, and let's
Absolutely
split it?
not. Commissions are 100% negotiable. It could have been 8%, it could have been 10%, it could have been 3%. Huh. There is no standard, and that's one of the issues in this lawsuit, is that now let's go with the lawsuit. The lawsuit said it was not right for as a buyer's agent, now let's go to the buyer side, because we're talking about that the buyer's agent needs to have their own representation signed to determine how much they were going to get paid by their buyer. So where the struggle came in here is a buyer rep agreement wasn't signed in most cases in most states. Now, in our state of Tennessee, we require a buyer rep agreement to be signed. In a lot of states in the United States, that is not a requirement. So for us, in the state of Tennessee, this legal side of it was kind of dotted and crossed, right? In a lot of states, it was not. So what they were saying is this: if you're a buyer and you have a buyer's agent represent you, there needs to be a buyer rep agreement signed between the buyer and the agent that's representing them. Okay. And within that agreement, before the home is ever identified,
it'll be specified
on how much the buyer's agent is going to be compensated by the buyer.
So that'll be set right there. And
it's set before you even go look at a home. As a matter of fact, the law states this now, and what's going to state this when it all goes into effect around August, is that we absolutely cannot show anybody a home, even open the door, without this buyer rep agreement signed. Okay. So there's no longer going to be the ability for a buyer to say, I want to go show this home. I want you to show me this home, but I'm not willing to sign anything. That is now a law that's going to go into effect, okay? So what happens is when a buyer signs an agreement to open the door, when they open that agreement, there's going to be a commission dollar associated with how much you're willing to pay me as a buyer's agent if you choose to buy this particular piece of property. The burden of the commission is no longer on the listing agent to give to the buyer's agent their compensation.
So meaning that you're working directly with them. It's not on the listing agent's thing. So could it just be then, it'll just transfer out? It's always been 6% in general, even though you said that was not a law. Yeah. Well, maybe now it'll be a 3% agreement, and then the other 3 is yours, and nothing really changes.
Well, I think this is where it's going to get fun, right? And so we're going to
you can negotiate more, maybe. I don't know.
I think in the end, if I was to give my long-term opinion on what I believe is going to happen, or somewhat of what we're seeing already, I think that it's better for the buyer's agent. They're going to have to learn some skills when they're approaching their value proposition to their buyer.
Yeah.
Why their experience is in line with what their compensation is going to be. So some agent might say I'll do it for 2%. Another agent might say I will do it for 3%. And I believe there's going to be a lot of agents who work with buyers that says, hey, listen, I want to get 4%. And so that responsibility is going to be on the buyer and their agent. No longer the listing agent is responsible. This is the way it actually should have been the whole time.
And the listing, I guess that makes sense. And the listing agent then will still be compensated by the seller, right?
Correct.
So it'll be separate. So in the long run, I'm trying to decide whether this could mean more or less money saved by the consumer.
Okay.
Well, like you just said, if all of a sudden it's 4%, I mean, in the past, the buyer didn't have to pay anything because it all came out of the sellers. So if you're going to have to pay more if you're buying a home now. Right? If you're the one responsible for paying it.
This is exactly, so watch this. So you're a buyer, and most buyers today are not cash over amount of cash in their accounts, right? So they're now required to put down 3.5% to 20%, depending on what loan they choose to go with, right? They're going to have to, buyer now is going to have to come out of pocket for an appraisal fee, a home inspection fee, closing costs with their mortgage lender, okay, and now a buyer representation fee.
That's not, because those others you just said you're already doing, as we said.
They're already doing. So
yeah, but now you're adding this fee in top.
Now you're adding this fee. Now what's interesting is you're adding, let's just say, anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 in that range or higher. Yeah,
depending on the value of the home.
Depending on the value of the home. That's exactly right. So what's going to happen now with these, this is where this actually, in my opinion, hurts our entire industry, in that if we don't come up with a way for a buyer to continue to purchase and develop all of these out-of-pocket costs now they're going to have to include this commission dollar, then what it's going to do is it's going to stump or trump the amount of home sales that a buyer is willing to pay, which means when home sales when there aren't as many home sales, it's going to start causing an effect on the pricing value.
Yeah.
Okay, because now you have a lot of buyers today who need the cash they have in order to purchase the home they have, not including the commission dollars. Now you're going to ask the buyer to pay all of these fees, which is the way this should be. And this is not like it shouldn't be this way. It should be this way. But what this will most likely do is cause the housing market to slow down, because the buyer, based on the percentage of what they have to pay, is not going to afford to be able to buy. So how do we solve the problem?
We're going to take a break. We'll come back and talk about that. I mean, one solution could be, does this push people away from working with brokers? Maybe they say, I'm not going to hire one. I'm just going to go.
Well, it's going to be fun to talk about that next.
I have a feeling he's already got this worked out. It is fascinating. It's still a little confusing. Maybe you haven't had a handle on it yet. It's going to be different from what you do moving forward, whether you buy or sell. We'll get into more of that with Bernie right after this. Stay with us. We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Bernie Gallerani is with us, real estate agent extraordinaire, going over what basically is going to be a significant change. You said the biggest change maybe in the real estate industry in forever, right?
Oh, this is the biggest change we've had I mean, they say these commission structures that have been in place, now I've just heard this, I don't know how, I haven't fact checked any of this, have been around for about 108 years, the way it's been doing business.
Okay.
This now is changed.
So just keep in mind then, so why this is important as you join us today and try to get a handle on this is that the way your parents bought a home, the way you bought a home, the way you sold a home, all of that up until this point when it officially becomes law and is agreed by the federal court, probably later this year, maybe in August, will change the way you buy and sell homes and what it costs. And, all right, so Bernie, when we went to the break, we were talking about, okay, who's going to pay more? How is this going to pay more? As we continue to explain it, I want you to pick up where we left off. I just want to make it as clear as possible to our viewers whether or not the consumer, depending on whether you're a buyer or a seller, if this is going to cost you money or make you money. Well, not make you money, but make it more affordable to buy or sell a house.
Here's where I think a seller. Okay, let's go to a seller first.
Okay, so let's say you're selling.
Because remember, a buyer has to have their own compensation representation agreement signed with their agent.
Okay, so you have an agent you hire, say, I want you to find a house for me, and he said, okay, let's sign this. Okay, when I find you the house you like, you're going to pay me 3% of the value of that home. Boom. Okay, that's my agreement moving forward. That's in the past you wouldn't have had to do that.
Correct. You wouldn't have had to do that.
Because, okay, so then he finds you a home, or she finds you a home, 3% there, and then now the seller's going to get some money.
So let's just say now the seller's deciding, because all the sellers so far to right now, and a lot of people think, well, this is not into effect yet. Legally, through the DOJ, it's not into effect yet, but a lot of brokerage firms are already moving towards these practices because we don't want to say, okay, well, today's the day, and then everybody changes their mindset.
Let me guess, you've already moved toward it.
We've already moved towards it. We've been doing it now for a couple of months.
Okay, well, so good. You can give us an idea how it works.
Yeah, it works. It has its ups and its downs, right? There's pluses and there's minuses on it. But if a seller today lists their home and signs a compensation agreement with me to list their home, okay. So they're going to give me a certain amount of percentage to market their home.
All right.
We will then ask them, how much would you like to offer the other side when they ask? Because the agent will call us and ask us now. And what's interesting, and we'll circle back to some notes I wrote here. Inside of our MLS, this is super important. Up until this new change will happen in August, we are no longer going to be able to put in the multi-listing service the compensation for the buyer's agent.
Okay.
So today, if you go on the MLS and you list a property and you go on the MLS, the buyer's agent can go onto the MLS and see how much money the agent or the seller has agreed to pay the buyer's representation.
Right. So that's out the window now.
Well,
right?
It's out the window when they make the final decision, which they're going to ultimately do. So right now, so we'll use 3%. If they go in there and they see the 3% compensation, they're going to know that the seller and or the agent is offering 3% for you to, if you're the agent, the buyer's agent, to bring me the buyer to the property. That is going away, so there'll be zero there. There'll be nothing in that box. There won't even be a box there to check. Okay. So now doesn't mean the seller is not offering compensation, but really the way to know if the seller's offering compensation is to call the listing agent and say, is your seller offering any compensation for me, the buyer's agent? Now, the buyer's agent has their own representation, but let's assume their buyer doesn't have any money, which is what a majority of the buyers are today. They don't have the amount of cash needed. So how do they buy? What they're doing is the buyer's agent has to get their compensation from the seller.
Oh.
And why the seller's going to want to pay this compensation is because there are not enough buyers for all the homes that are for sale.
Well, that can change depending on the market, but that's what you're saying now.
Well, there's always been more, unless you're talking about 2020 or 2021, which in the history of our country has never happened and probably is not going to happen again, or we don't really want it to, because that means there's some catastrophic events going on, okay, like a pandemic.
Yeah.
Right? All right. There's always been more inventory than there have been buyers.
Okay.
Always. Always. Like, always. Not even just occasionally. Always. Other than you had 2020 where you had still homes that expired. There was still properties that expired. So what I'm saying to you is the homes that are on the market today, if they aren't getting a buyer to say yes, and that might be because they're not offering enough compensation, potentially, in that the buyer and the agent, if the buyer doesn't have money, even though they're signing a buyer rep agreement, they can get compensation from the seller. So the seller will then determine how many buyers could go into the home. Okay. Well, does that make sense?
Yeah, but I want to do this in a real-world scenario then. Okay, so I hire Bernie, and we sign an agreement, a buyer agreement, 3%, okay, whatever. And then maybe we're looking on Zillow, and I'm like, I want that home in Hermitage for $300,000. Can you go? And I want to come look at it right now. All right. So when I do that to you, what call do you make? You call whoever's listing that house, right? You say, look, Nick Beres is a client of mine, and he'd like to come take a look at this house for his son. Okay. He wants to come out here and look at it. All right. So how does it think? So he'll say, if you reach out to him, yeah, I'll meet you there tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Okay. So where does this happen where there's this negotiation?
So let's play this as you're the buyer and I'm the buyer's agent. Yeah. You sign an agreement with me at 3%. Yeah. And you say to me, I don't have 3% to give you, but obviously I can't get in the house.
Right now, meaning I have 3%. Let's say this house is $300,000, and so
$9,000.
That's like $9,000. So I would have to give you $9,000.
No, you'd have to agree in a buyer rep agreement that.
Wouldn't I just wrap that into my mortgage, loan that I'm getting? I don't have the cash to pay for the house either.
It's already wrapped into the mortgage loan because the seller has never paid the fee. The buyer actually has always paid their own fee. Watch.
Oh, okay. See, Brad, that's an important point now. So you're saying it's always been
wrapped into the mortgage. So now
all of a sudden, so you're saying, okay, I sign you, and you're like, Nick, if you're going to look at this $300,000 house, 3%, you're going to need to pay me $9,000 for this. And I'm like, well, I don't have $9,000. I mean, I'm trying to get a down payment for this house, Bernie.
Right.
And so you're saying, okay, well, this is how we're going to work it out for you now. I'll get my $9,000 based on, I'm going to go to this seller.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, look, you got a 3% deal here. He really wants to buy this house. You need to pay me 4%.
Or 3. No, not 4, because you have an agreement with me with 3%. So I can't ask him for 4. I can only ask him for what my agreement is with you.
Okay, then how is he? Okay, so 3%, and he'll say, well, yeah, I really want to sell the house, and 3%. Okay, and then how does he make money?
The seller? Well, the seller's going to see the seller. Okay, because
you'll get a percentage of the sale of the house separate, right? Is that it?
Correct. So what's going to?
You'll have a deal with the seller.
Correct. So what's happening is you're signing an agreement with me.
Okay.
So you and I have an agreement, and you're going to pay me 3% to find you a property.
Yep.
But you say to me, I don't have 3%. But I'm saying I can't show you the house unless you compensate me 3%.
Yeah, but you're going to get compensated once the damn house sells.
Well, how am I getting compensated?
What? I mean, I'll just pay you out of my loan. I'll build that into my loan.
But the mortgage company can't do that. Mortgage company can't compensate 3% extra to pay me.
Well, y'all just ask for more money in the loan. I won't tell them where it's going. I just need, $300,000, and okay, so it doesn't work that way. So, well, obviously, most people, you're right, are not going to have that $9,000 to give you on the spot, and you know that. So, how do you work around that then? Okay,
all right, so you and I have an agreement.
Okay.
You're going to give me 3%. Let's just say $9,000.
Yeah, okay.
However, you don't have $9,000.
Right.
But you have to sign an agreement with me. I can't show you the house.
Okay, so I signed it anyway, and you're saying, Nick, don't worry, we're going to work this out. I'm going to tell you. I mean, Bernie, I don't have the $9,000 for you. Can we still work this out? And you're going to say,
what you can say to me is, I don't have the $9,000. I'll sign this, but I don't have the $9,000. So you can maybe only show me houses where the seller's willing to pay the fee.
Right.
So then I have to call now the agent and say to the agent, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, I have a buyer right now. How much compensation is your seller willing to pay? Because the sellers are going to offer some sort of compensation. Okay, most likely would be my guess.
Yeah.
All right, they should. Anyway, how's that?
Yeah.
I don't want to go too deep into this because we're still working on legal sides. But
will you tell them that my buyer is giving me?
Well, you'd have to, right? Because if you don't have the $9,000 to pay, I would have to get it somewhere else.
Okay, so you're going to say we need. You could even ask for more than that, couldn't you? Oh no, you can't because we have that deal.
I can't ask for more. I can tell you I want 4% and ask for 4%, but I can't get any more dollars. So what the agreement says through NAR, through the National Association of Realtors, is that if compensation is higher than the agreement you and I have for compensation, I'm not allowed to receive the difference.
Okay.
Okay. I can only receive the amount of money in which you and I have agreed upon when we originally met.
So the way this will work then is we sign that deal. You call the seller, and you say, what's the compensation? And they'll have already talked to the seller, the homeowner, and then say, look, to sell your house, if you're dealing with real estate agents, you're going to have to cover this. So 3%. Will you pay the $9,000 out of that? Which will be the $9,000 coming out of the sale of the house, right?
Which if you look at it, it's not really any different than what we had 108 years before this.
No, it's not.
So when you look at this lawsuit that had happened, really, the homeowners don't win in this situation. The agent doesn't win in this situation. The buyer absolutely does not win in this situation. So, I guess it would be fun to say, well, who really wins? And I'll let the consumer. The seller's not really winning because they're still most likely going to be paying some compensation.
Well, where was the? Okay, I guess when we're talking about who wins and loses, it's based on the results of this lawsuit, which paid compensation. I don't know who the plaintiffs were. The plaintiffs, buyers, or sellers. I mean, this had to have been found where, well, this is wrong. They're taking too much money. This is not right the way it's set up. Who won in the lawsuit beside the lawyers? Who were the plaintiffs? Were the plaintiffs buyers or sellers?
They were the sellers.
So, but you're saying the sellers probably don't really win in all this. I mean, they...
Well, I think that the win is this. A buyer and an agent should have their own representation.
Okay, so it's separate.
That says... Okay, let's spin this back just real quick. By law, we are not allowed to tell somebody in the real estate business how much money they can earn.
Okay.
And until this law came into place, so this is the win, is that if I'm a listing agent and I'm paying a buyer's agent 3%, I'm then telling the buyer's agent, me the listing agent, on how much money you can earn, because I'm only paying you 3%. Because you didn't have representation from your buyer. What the law states, which is good, is that I'm now going to say how much I'm worth as a buyer's agent, and I'm going to say, Nick, I want 3% or 3.5%. And then I'm negotiating my commission with you. This has nothing to do with what the seller's willing to pay me or the listing agent's willing to pay me on that agreement because you have your own agreement with me. And this is this law that says partially is that I'm not allowed to tell a buyer's agent how much money they can earn, and I'm doing that by only offering them 3% because they're not getting an agreement with their buyer.
Yeah.
So if anything that sets a precedence on this is that the buyer's agent and the buyer are now in an agreement of what the agent will earn outside of the listing agent and the seller.
Is it more likely the result of this and the industry standard maybe, not that you said it was set in stone with 6%, could the result of this mean that likely it will be more than that moving forward? Could it be 7, 8% depending on what's negotiated? Or do you think it'll stay the same, or more likely could you negotiate it? It could be less, maybe 5% depending on the situation.
Yes to all of those.
Like,
it could be a higher percentage that the buyer's agent receives. It could be even a higher percentage than what it used to be that the seller's going to be compensating the agent in that agreement based on the contract that they had with their buyer. Could it be less? Yes, in some cases it probably will be, and that's a whole different.
And who's supposed to negotiate that? I mean, as the individual hiring the broker to work with me to buy, I can come to you, and now Bernie's very established. You sell a lot of homes. You're successful. I think I'll have a lot of luck with you, so maybe you're in a position to ask a little more. Now, there may be other agents that'll do it for 3, and you may do it for 4.
Some agents will probably do it for 2.
For 2. And so that's where if you sign with an agent for 2, maybe they sell the home, maybe they don't. If I go with 4 for you, I'm guessing I get the power of Bernie behind me, and the odds are, I mean, most people in that position like me don't really know. I know you now, of course, okay? But, a lot of people when they're thinking of buying and selling, they just kind of find a listing or get a referral and they talk to someone. They like them personally. We've talked about that before. But it should be their track record, right? I mean, how does well, as we go to break, how does the consumer navigate this moving forward, whether they negotiate with you to say, you think 4% is what you want, but I thought the industry standard was 6 and it's half and it's 3. Why am I paying you, Bernie, 4 instead of 3?
Right.
And
it's a good question.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll be back with more on that right after this. Is interesting. Back with Bernie Gallerani. All right, real estate agent, good guy. And I like him, and you see that he's very cordial and has a wonderful smile. But he has a sign in his office that says, "Coffee is for closers." Have you ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross? Probably not. Maybe you haven't. If you have, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, watch it. But anyway.
I'm not sure that's a really good depiction of me, but
well,
I know
no, it's not. But you're the one with this.
You're the one that keeps calling me that, but yet you've never even seen.
I know. All I know is he's very successful, and the people that work for him are as well.
Yeah.
I mean it in a positive way. So, but the question going to the break then is, in terms of negotiations moving forward with this, how should the consumer, I'm deciding I want to buy it, and I want to hire a real estate agent to help me buy a home, okay? So I'm a buyer, and I'm coming to you, and I'm like, Bernie, all right. And how do you determine, you'll say, well, Nick, I'd like to take you on, and I'm going to want 4%. And I'm looking at a $300,000 home, so that might be $12,000 that I have to pay up front. But I may have someone else saying, okay, now they have the flexibility. Well, Nick, I'll be your buyer, and 2%. And that's, you can negotiate.
Yeah.
What's your take on how that plays out, or how you decide? Someone may say, well, I'll go with what's the big difference between real estate agents? Maybe we hit that again, because there are differences.
Yeah. Well, I think it's no different than if you're hiring a listing agent for those same things, right? We have a great saying, and that is, what is our value proposition in the transaction? So how does a seller find value in some realtors versus in others, right? So the difference between today, moving forward within the NAR settlement and what was previous to the NAR settlement or the judgment that we had last year. As a listing agent, we are competing against other agents, and we have to share a value proposition for why someone should choose us.
Correct.
So it's either marketing and approach and negotiation skills and experience, right, all those types of things. Before this NAR transaction, an agent who worked with buyers in a lot of cases if they opened up the door, they had a really great smile, they got compensated. Today, now a buyer's agent has to share its value proposition, so they have to share with that buyer why they feel they're in a better position to serve them at, let's say, 3 or 4% versus somebody doing it for, let's say, 2%.
Interesting. So, I mean, all those questions you would ask when you're hiring someone to sell your home. Because you're like, can you sell it? Yeah, I think we can get this kind of money, blah, blah, blah. But in the past, I guess, you wouldn't really talk about it if you're hiring someone to find a house for you. You figure, oh, they're going to look at listings and find something for me. I don't know.
Yes.
But there's more to it than that.
Yes. Yeah. So what's really fun and interesting, I think, which is why a lot of realtors are panicking, which please don't do this. This is going to be a great thing, and everybody's going to be fine. And if you're an agent today, and this is the world that you are kind of frustrated with at this new, it's all going to be fine. I think everybody's going to be just fine. We will have to learn. You'll have to learn, I think, as an agent who works with buyers, that what is your value proposition? Why should somebody work with you versus working with somebody else who's willing to discount their commissions?
Or maybe not hiring someone. I mean, again, I think there is some concern, at least, and I think you're going to probably say it's unfounded, that with this in place, they say, heck, if I have to pay a percentage, I mean, I'm just going to go on Zillow, find myself, and call the seller's broker myself. And just get this going. I mean, that may or may not happen. It could happen. I mean, some people, for the first time, if they bought and sold before, they're going to be hit in the face all of a sudden with, the new buyer with them to say, oh, hey, the things have changed. You got to sign this. And they're going to be like, wait, what are you talking about? What?
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Because you just said something, I think, that could be a confusion for most people. If I'm a listing agent, and you just said, why doesn't the buyer just call the listing agent? And I think this is where, so before this ruling, buyers would call the listing agent versus working with buyers in a lot of cases, high percentage cases. And the reason they would do it is because they wanted to save the commission. So they figured if they sidestepped the agent, the buyer's agent, and they went right to the listing agent, they could save the 6% and maybe make it 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because they don't have another agent involved. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay. What's really interesting about this is the rumors that have been around that says, hey, all the buyers are now going to come to the listing agents with this new ruling, so they don't have to pay the buyer agent a commission. Are you following me? What's really interesting is that buyer is still going to have to sign a buyer rep agreement with me, even though I'm the listing agent.
Is that right?
Yes. So, and then we don't work twice as hard for the same money. So they're going to sign a buyer rep agreement with the listing agent for, let's just say, 3%. On top of the 3%.
They're still going to have to do that.
Absolutely.
So all of a sudden, that person's wearing both hats.
It actually becomes more strength for the listing agent, because the listing agent can't show you that house without a buyer rep agreement. Before we could do it, now we can't. And which is saying, Nick, if you came to me and I had a listing and you said, hey, I want to see that listing that you have listed, I would say, great, Nick, you have to sign this buyer rep agreement at 3%. And you might say, well, you already got a buyer rep agreement signed with the listing agent. And I would say, yes, that's for marketing and selling the home, but I'm now representing you in this transaction, so I need to get compensated from you.
That's pretty sweet then if you're in that position.
That's exactly right.
You're getting a double dip there, but that's legit if they came to you.
No matter what happens, if I'm the listing agent, I still have to have a buyer rep agreement signed if you come into my property.
What about people who sell their homes themselves?
I still have to have a buyer rep agreement signed.
Yeah.
So the one that I was just talking to you off air, where our agent had compensated, that was a for sale by owner, and my agent worked a deal in compensation with the for sale by owner, and the for sale by owner ended up paying this little bit larger commission rate because they were not represented. This is what's key. When you're not represented, you and I have talked about this in the past about by owners. Well, they're saving money, they're saving money, they're saving money. And it's been proven across the board, for sale by owners never save money than listing with a traditional agent. They never really save any money. They believe they do because they don't have anything to compare it to, right? But they don't really save money. They believe they do, but they really don't in the end. And there's lots of statistics, and if you want to get me at BernieGallerani.com, I can walk you through that. But we'll let them believe that. That's fine. But if you're for sale by owner and I'm an agent and I have a buyer rep agreement at 3% or 4%, and my buyer likes your home, that either buyer's paying me, which in a lot of cases they don't have the finances to do that, or the seller's going to pay it. Or the house is not going to sell. Or
the house won't sell. All right. And I think I got a handle on this now. It's odd that to me, I think what gets you is like $418 million settlement. There must have been something really underhanded going on here. Not really. It's not changing radically what the consumer is going to have to pay necessarily. It's just changing who it's paid to and who you have to deal with. I mean, that's the thing that gets me, and I think that may hit folks. It's just different now. You're going to have an agreement now with your buyer.
The part, and I'd be really careful when I say this because I'm not a lawyer and I don't want them chasing me down, but the challenge with this suit, from my understanding, I'm not the one that looks through all the legal mumbo jumbo all the time, but this is not like we were breaking the law.
No.
Right? We were doing the same. The realtors have been doing the business that way for 100 years. It's just somehow somebody spun it in a manner that makes sense. So instead of just changing the law, there's been a $1.7 billion judgment. And so now you look at it going, well, wow, there's this crazy judgment out there, and no one really even realized they were breaking the law. So it was kind of like, hey, by the way, you've been breaking the law for 100 years. Nobody knew we were breaking the law, and all of a sudden now we're just got this crazy thing. So it's been an adjustment for all of us. Here's the good news. It's going to make the relationship between the buyer and seller better. It's going to, between the buyer and the agent. It's going to make the relationship between the seller and their listing agent less complicated. And so in the end, I think it's a good thing.
Okay. And so just for the consumer, and I'm going to read this as we get a break and let you respond to it when we come back in our final segment. One take on this is that for the average price American home for sale, $417,000 is kind of what they say may be the average. Sellers are paying more than $25,000 in brokerage fees. These costs are passed on to the buyer, boosting the price of homes in America. Under this new agreement and the way things change, the fee could fall by between $6,000 and $12,000. Could be less, which could save the consumer some money. All right, stay right there.
Okay. Yes, we'll talk about that.
Okay, I'll let you clarify.
Okay.
Take a break. Be back with that in our final segment right after this. All right, back on Morning Line. Final segment with Bernie. He's kind of walking me through something during the break. All right, so in a nutshell then, moving forward, as a consumer, I have a house. I talked about the American average price per home, $417,000, all right? If I have that on the market and it's not selling because there's so many homes on the market at that point, and you are representing a buyer.
Yes.
And you come to me and you've already signed an agreement with your buyer, your client, for a percentage.
Yes.
You'll come to me and say, look, we want to buy your house, but to do this, you're going to have to pay this fee that I've agreed. Which in the past, before this law changed, you're still, would it have been built in like that or not?
So here's what's it. Before this, we could not put compensation in the purchase and sale agreement. We had to put it on a compensation agreement.
Oh, okay.
Now, it's not between the agent, the listing agent. See, before it was the listing agent offering the buyer's agent.
Right.
It wasn't the seller. It was the listing agent offering the buyer's agent. So we would have a compensation agreement between the two parties, meaning the two agents.
Now it's between the seller.
Now it's between the seller and the buyer.
The buyer.
Yes. All right. So now on the purchase and sale agreement, what I would do in this situation, right, is if you're the seller and I'm working with the buyer, correct? And my buyer is unable to pay, let's just say it's $12,000. I'm going to write in the purchase and sale agreement to you, Nick. I will give you the $417,000 that you're asking for the property, but I'm going to ask that you pay the $12,000 in commission that the buyer has contracted me on. If you say yes to this, we're going to move forward and purchase your house. Okay. What do you do?
I think I would do it, or I might come back and say, yeah, that sounds good, but how about this? I'll pay 10 and see if the buyer will pick up the other 2. I could try that, and the buyer could say, no, you have no offers.
Absolutely could try that.
You could try that, but the buyer could say, you have no offers, I'm not going to budge, and then I'll have to make my call. But could that happen? Could you do negotiations like that?
Absolutely, 100%.
Now, you're talking
I think a lot of that will happen.
Okay. Now, you're talking also about a scenario where you come to me, and my home's been on the market for 2 months and hasn't sold, and you're the one. But what about in the hot market like Nashville, where, for a while there were people knocking on doors and asking, would you please sell me your house? Yeah. And they were offering well above the list price just to buy homes that were already out there on the market. Yeah. In that climate, how will that play out with with this at all?
I think personally that if you have it where you had a 2020, which I don't think we're going to have again, but if you have that situation, I think any home that hits the market, which there are a lot right now, where they'll go on the market and they'll have multiple offers on them, I think that is where the compensation for the buyer's agents diminishes.
Makes sense. Yeah. I think we've done a great job laying into this. We could dig even more, but just before we wrap things up, just wanted then to ask you right now, we talked about 2020 and where we are now in 2024. What is, since I haven't seen you in a couple months because I've been out, what's the market right now in Nashville again? Is there a surplus of housing? Are the prices, because of interest rates, kind of stagnating? What's your climate assessment right now? And not just Nashville, but I guess the Middle Tennessee region radiating out from Nashville.
Yeah. I mean, I love Nashville, and I think it's a great market for lots of different reasons, and I think there's a lot of folks still moving here for a lot of reasons, right? This is a really great place to live. The weather, I think, is awesome. Me personally, I'm originally from California, so people love the California weather. I actually think Nashville weather is much better. And as we're seeing an influx of Californians moving in here too, right, for lots of different reasons. But certainly our market is very stable. It is not what it was in 20 and 21. Interest rates are certainly climbing up. I think there is some uncertainty in the market, but all that I think will pass in time. So yes, it's not as good as it was a few years ago, but it's also as good as you want to make it, and that's how I always look at everything.
Yeah, I agree.
Our business is thriving and doing really well because of how we approach the business. I think there are others that it's not doing so well for. That probably is how they approach the business. But lots of people buying. I mean, I sold 68 homes last month, so there's a lot of people still purchasing.
That's crazy. By the way, so we talked about my son who's going to plan on moving back here in the next year, and we're looking for places just as we go. If my wife's the wizard on this, she'd probably be good working for you. She's out there looking all the time and finding deals and this and that. So if we find a house under this new agreement, we find a house that we like, okay, just on the market, she's driving around, she sees listings, and she goes, that's where she would put a call to, do we want to hire you to go and take that, or does she put in a call to the seller's realtor? How does that work? What would she do?
Well, I mean, she could do either one. Whatever she feels most comfortable doing, whether she has her own buyer representation, buyer rep agreement. Here's always the interesting challenge in our state. Okay? When you call the listing agent, let's just say I'm the listing agent, and you come to me to buy a home. I no longer can represent you and or the seller. I become a facilitator, so I'm a middle party, which means I can't give you any advice. I can't give them any advice. I'm just the person in the middle. So I would say to anybody who's out there right now, it's fine if you want to work with a listing agent. There's not an issue there. But understand that you're not having any representation. Zero. Because we can't. It's the law that says we can't do it. The only thing we can do is sign a facilitator relationship that says we're the third party in the middle, we're the negotiators between the buyer and the seller. We cannot give you any advice. And it's not the best. It's not the best for the seller, and it's not the best for the buyer. Right. Because there is no advice from the professional realtor in the middle. I believe everybody should have their own representation, have your own buyer rep, have your own seller rep. That way it's actually done the right way. That's kind of the way we've done it. I mean, there's legal things, but it also gives you a sense of, there's always that question of how much should I pay her? How much should we offer? Or what does it seem like right now? And you get scuttlebutt, too, about, homes, right? You have research. Can well, I know there's termites in that house. Or well, I mean, we have laws we have to follow and full disclosures and things like that. But if I'm representing you as a listing, right, and I get a buyer and an agent, I can fully engage in this conversation with you to tell you, hey, listen, I've seen this game before. You hold right here. I can get you more money. I might even, in this deal, I'm going to end up with giving you 10 or 12 or 15,000 more just because of where they're at and the trick that they're playing. That's right. And this is where you win as having full representation. Same with the buyer. If I'm working with a buyer, and this is the part I think people don't understand, a majority of my real estate career was spent listing and selling properties, and I know all the ins and outs of listing properties and the emotional ups and downs that sellers go through to sell homes. That's an advantage for me when I'm working with a buyer and they're not my listing client, and I can go in as a buyer rep and say, listen, don't you worry about this. I'm so familiar with how this works. I know they're going to probably end up selling you the house for this. Okay? Just based on the situation, the days on market, I can look at days on market and tell you how motivated somebody is. The longer they're on the market, the more motivated they become, how all the little tricks are, the price adjustments. If you look at the price adjustments, if you look at our MLS, it'll show how many times they've reduced the property. I can tell you how motivated that seller is based on that length of time and those price adjustments, and that's an advantage of a value proposition as a buyer's agent I can bring to a buyer. So the $12,000, $15,000, $18,000 in commissions, we can typically save that by negotiating with the seller because we have an inside experience on how all that works.
That's huge. I mean, it's almost like you have a profile on an individual based on some of these elements you're saying you observe. Now, is it a little different, though, if it's a seller who's going to have several offers on the property?
It is totally different. So if we put the house on the market, we have several offers on.
Most of the houses we've looked at one point or another were something that there were more than one offer on it, maybe.
Oh, and that's a good thing for the seller.
Yeah.
The seller probably in that case is going to save a little bit of compensation that they have to give to the buyer's agent, if any. If they have a ton of offers like they did in 2020 or 21, right, where you're getting 6, 8, 10 offers on properties, I would say that the buyer is going to be fully responsible for compensating their own buyer's agent.
Yeah.
If you are one that your house is sitting on the market a month or 2 months and you haven't received any offers, or those offers aren't looking very attractive, if in the case that we just used of that $12,000, it's very possible that that seller will contribute that entire 3% to get that deal to go through.
Marie, you know your stuff.
Well, no, I mean, we just do it a lot. And so
I know. Well, the experience counts, man. That's what I'm saying. What you just talked about. I mean, you've got years under your belt to pick these things up. You know how to handle this stuff. Makes a difference when you're talking about the biggest investment of your life.
Well, and I want the consumer to understand that this is the biggest investment of most people's lives, and if they play it small, meaning that they don't have an agent that really understands how to protect their value. A lot of buy owners do this, by the way. They work very hard at trying to save money, and yet the statistics show they actually lose a tremendous amount more because of how they approach it. Now, there's going to be buy owners out there that'll watch this and aren't going to like that comment. Call me or go to my website. I can show you statistically why that's the truth.
It's up there. There's the website. Bernie, good to see you again, my friend. Take care. We'll see you again very soon, all right?
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Back with the programming note right after this.